Hello and welcome to the Cyberpunk channel, and today we're going to be combining the new Palit Gamerock RTX 3070 Ti and the Ryzen 5600X, and to see how good the CPU and GPU combination is, or if it's one to avoid. Quick update, I am in the process of closing on my house. I finished inspections, I'm doing all that homeowners association, home insurance, adult stuff. That is happening all very soon, and I'll be moving out of here at the end of the month. So with that said, definitely stay notified for my upcoming uploads because views have been concerningly low. So definitely have that bell notification to all if you want to see my upcoming videos. And secondly, I will be selling spare tech from my current studio to make room for the new one. So follow me on Twitter if you want to see what my listings are for what spare tech I'll be selling, ranging from hardware to fully built gaming PCs. And back to the video. Anyways, I want to thank you guys for voting on this CPU and GPU combination on my latest YouTube community poll. That means you guys are wanting to see what this is, which is good. I always appreciate community feedback. And while this video may seem pointless to a lot of you just simply because obtaining a graphics card like this is just not possible in today's market, let's say you're a pre-built person and you're looking into one of those pre-built gaming PCs, this video may still be of use because you may just want to know how well an RTX 3070 Ti and a Ryzen 5600X can do on your favorite games that you're playing on your old PC or console like Valorant, Apex Legends, Fortnite, Grand Theft Auto 5, even Cyberpunk 2077, and so on and so forth. I'll let you know. So this video should be somewhat informative regardless. Before we get into the benchmarks, let's do a little highlight on the graphics card we have here on show today, that being the Palit Gamerock RTX 3070 Ti. So this has 6,144 cores versus 5,888 on the original 3070. The biggest difference between this and the original 3070 is the memory. You're getting 8 GB of GDDR6X memory on here with a higher memory bandwidth versus regular GDDR6 on the regular 3070. This has a 256-bit memory interface, and it has a higher base clock of 1,575 on at least the Palit cards versus 1,500 on the regular 3070, but the boost clock speed on both Palit Edition Gamerock cards are 1,845. As for the specific aftermarket version of the RTX 3070 Ti though, this Palit Gamerock Edition card with this trademark cooler that it has with this crystalline ARGB front is very bright and very colorful. So if you're a fan of having the most RGB possible inside your gaming PC, if you can get one, this Palit Gamerock Edition card is the way to go. It is blindingly bright inside your PC, or for that matter, even on a test bench. And for that matter, it's ARGB at the end of the day, so it can still sync up with other ARGB peripherals inside your gaming PC. So this definitely has to be the most just blingy looking graphics card you can get on the market. With that said, this does have a double U piped heatsink underneath this cooler, which does allow for surprisingly good temperatures. While I was testing this on Cyberpunk 2077 and other demanding PC games, the temperature never exceeded at max 67 degrees Celsius at an open test bench, which I find fairly impressive given how much lighting there is on this card. So I don't think this card is sacrificing looks for any sort of cooling performance. It looks like Palit has done their homework for that front. And on that note too, it's actually not too loud. From when I was playing on this, it did not sound like a jet engine at any moment. So despite the looks, the cooling performance is there for the Gamerock Edition cooler on these 3070 Ti. So with the GPU out of the way, let's talk about the actual combo and what we're looking for in the benchmarks to determine if this is a good CPU and GPU combination. So of course, beyond just seeing how many frames per second we can get, I want you to take a look at the CPU and GPU utilization metrics at the top left of all the games you're going to be seeing. And preferably, we want the graphics card to be anywhere above 80% in terms of utilization, of course, depending on the graphical intensity of what we're running, and the CPU to never exceed, say, 75% utilization. If it gets above that, that means we're getting somewhat close to a bottleneck, but say the CPU is at 100% utilization, but the GPU is at like 80%, that means the CPU is bottlenecking the GPU. So with all that said, let's get into the benchmarks, starting with Valorant, where we got a top frame per second average of 452.2 on the gun range at 1440p at maxed graphical settings. So that single core performance of the 5600X is definitely not limiting the RTX 3070 Ti by any means at 1440p. So I think this is a pass. Though going to a CPU focused benchmark on the game The Rift Breaker, at Ray Tracing Ultra, which is fairly demanding at 1440p, we got about 63.7 frames per second with the 5600X and 3070 Ti. Now this is a game I just added to the benchmarking list. I don't have that many comparisons yet, but this is a CPU focused benchmark, as you can tell from the gameplay, and you're still getting above 60 frames per second with all of this craziness and madness going on. But with more benchmarks to come, I'll see if this is actually a good metric or not. Going on to Apex Legends, I got an average of 212.7 frames per second with everything maxed out. Nothing abnormal to see here. That looks all good. Then going to the CSGO benchmark map, other than that really low 1% low, which usually happens all the time with the benchmark map that I use when you go through all this smoke, I got an average of 477.2 frames per second. Yeah, that's good. At 1440p, nothing to complain there. Then on to Forza Horizon 4 at 1440p, ultra settings, 177.7 frames per second. And from all my runs on that game in the past on the benchmark tool, that is a good frame per second, especially for a $300 CPU. So I'd say that's a pass for sure right there. Then going on to Fortnite at Epic settings with DLSS set to performance to get some more frames per second at 1440p. On my benchmark map, I got 204.2 frames per second with a 1% low of 112.7. So plenty of frames, all the while being mostly smooth, at least given that benchmark map. In a regular game, you aren't going to be seeing that many effects and that many traps as you're like playing just a regular match. So the frame rate will definitely be higher in a regular game versus what I got here. So this is pretty supple. Then going on to Grand Theft Auto 5 using the benchmark tool at MSA 8X, max graphical settings, 141.9 frames per second. So for Grand Theft Auto 5 and how old it is, no issues here. Then going on to Rainbow Six Siege, we're using the Vulkan API at ultra settings, 400 frames per second with a 1% low of 324, and that should stay almost consistent with regular gameplay on the actual game. Nothing crazy to see here. And let's finish out with the final benchmark, that being Cyberpunk 2077 at Ray Tracing Ultra at 1440p. And I actually went ahead and threw in the RTX 3080 Ti benchmarks from last week just as a comparison. And here we got 65.9 frames per second average and 52.4 for the 1% low. Now it is slower than the 3080 Ti, especially at the Ray Tracing Ultra preset, but that gap there I think is a little bit indicative of showing that the 3070 Ti is, for the most part, being used up quite a bit from the 5600X. From that original video, I found that the 3080 Ti was actually bottlenecked by the 5600X, at specifically that Ray Tracing Ultra preset. So seeing that gap being about 15 frames per second between the 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti is actually to be expected, I think. If we had, say, a 5900X there, that gap would be a lot bigger because the 3080 Ti could be utilized more with that more powerful CPU. So I think, all in all, from all the benchmarks, that 3070 Ti is probably at the absolute limit with a 5600X. Even going back to Cyberpunk 2077, the CPU utilization never exceeded 85% just from that little playthrough that I did, and the GPU utilization was always at 96 to 98%. So I think right at the limit. So I want to say this 5600X and 3070 Ti is probably the absolute most you could have for that $300 CPU. If you go beyond that with a 3080, 3080 Ti, and so on and so forth, you could run into some bottleneck issues in a few games. But really, if we lived in a world where there were no GPU or CPU shortages, this $300 and $600 CPU and GPU combination would reign supreme. Anyways, that is it for today's video, and I'm going to give another thank you to Palit for sending over this beautiful looking RTX 3070 Ti. When I do builds in the future, after I move, I will be using this card more because it's such a flashy looking card. It is, I mean, it's got that cool factor if you like having all that ARGB, but I mean, as cool as this card is, you're not going to be able to find it on the DIY market, which is such an upset because as much flack as the RTX 3000 series has gotten for availability and pricing, you can't lie that some of these aftermarket manufacturers are producing some sick coolers for these graphics cards. One of those, of course, being Palit and their Gamerock OC Edition card, which again has the looks, but didn't sacrifice performance when it came to cooling or acoustics. So just all the good things you want. Anyways, that is it for today's video. Thank you for watching. And this is the Scatterable channel, signing out.